The Black Knight, Chapter 1, The Chosen Few. The story begins with a simple drawing of 4 names. This heavily publicized contest was meant to determine those privileged enough to attend the grand opening of the Black Knight Rollercoaster at Two Gardens theme park. The owner of the park, Alan Seasons, had decided to close Two Gardens for one day and invite a total of 8 guests through the gate, thus offering them reign over the entire park and the first chance to ride the unique thrill ride. Mr. Seasons chose 4 names randomly and asked each participant to invite a friend along. There were 8 in all, enough to fill one roller coaster car. The day of the grand opening, 8 anxious guests stood by the closed iron gate into Two Gardens. Here stood Ryan and his girlfriend Karen, Cody and his friend Jeremy, Brock and his partner Kyle, and Nash and his teenage son Gary. Beyond the gate, the Black Knight Rollercoaster stood 105 stories at its highest peak, a coaster to revolutionize them all. The Black Knight had 10 upside-down loops and 5 90-degree freefalls, and it accelerated from 0 to 85 miles per hour in 2 seconds. It was supposed to be the fastest roller coaster in America, and taking up 500 square feet and all in almost 2 miles of track, it proved to be one of the largest coasters as well, complete with barrel rolls, sharp turns, and an underground tunnel equipped with pyrotechnics. "Welcome, friends," Mr. Seasons proclaimed at the gates. He then led the group through a towering awning inscribed with the name Black Knight. A 50-story sculpture greeted the newcomers beside the expansive helix of track, clad in black armor and a pointed helmet. Its arms were held out, and its sword, which was bigger than any of them, was riveted to its belt. The Black Knight met them with open arms. "I never expected it to be this big," that's what she said, Karen added before Ryan could jump in. Ryan laughed and closed his mouth. "Check this out, Jeremy," Cody said excitedly, practically jumping up and down. At 15 years old, Cody had a cleanly buzzed head and a dirty tank top, and Jeremy had shaggy blonde hair and a ruffled sweatshirt with the Led Zeppelin insignia. Jeremy shook in his oversized clothing, but not in excitement like his friend. This hadn't been his idea at all. He preferred the rides that spun you around in circles, not those that dropped you through the air. Cody was the lucky ticket winner and Jeremy was just along for the ride, and for the promise of funnel cakes. "Come, it's waiting for you," Mr. Seasons shouted as he moved toward the platform. He was a heavy-set man, with little to no hair on his head, and he wore a long leather trench coat and high-top military boots. All 8 guests moved down the concrete path and up a few steps onto the platform. After some friendly deliberation, they each chose their seats 2 in a row and snapped their safety belts across their lap. Then they pulled the padded chest guards down onto their shoulders. Ryan took Karen's hand, which was noticeably shaking. She gave him a soft smile, but quickly lost it when she glanced at the track in front of them. Ryan and Karen had chosen seats at the very front of the car against her better wishes. The teenagers didn't even want the front seats, which spoke volumes that Ryan couldn't see but Karen understood all too well. The boys, Cody and Jeremy, chose the second row behind them, where they proceeded to cling to the handles on their chest guards in their building anticipation. Behind them sat Brock and Kyle. They were in their late 20s, Brock staring into the distance absently, while Kyle chatted casually about his job, although he spoke more to himself than anyone else. In the back row, Nash and his 13-year-old Gary sat together, half excited, yet both trembling. Nash nudged his son with an elbow, and they exchanged a smile. "I know this is always the worst part," Gary admitted after a gulp of fresh air. Nash raised his eyebrows as he was known to do when trying to get Gary to smile, and it usually worked. "I remember you being so excited this morning," Nash said. "I know, but once you get here and actually have to sit here, it's terrifying," Gary explained. Nash squirmed around uncomfortably in his plastic seat and leaned back his head. The bald spot on the back of his head burned against the headrest behind him, which had roasted all day in the sun. "Ready, riders?" Mr. Seasons cried. "Everyone nice and secure?" He stood on the edge of the platform, his open palm set above the control panel. Ryan glanced ahead of him at the track's progressive angle. After climbing to the first peak, some 200 feet in the air, they would plummet dramatically into the underground tunnel for about 4 seconds. Then they would climb back up at another sharp angle, spinning through a few barrel rolls before mounting the first upside-down loop. Ryan gulped, squeezing Karen's hand, and she could only squeeze back. "I'm sure after this is over, we'll want to jump back on for another ride," Ryan assured his girlfriend. Mr. Seasons wished them all a great ride, saluting them with 2 pudgy fingers. Then his other hand slammed down on the control panel and the Black Knight trembled. In a rush of cool air, the car rocketed away from the platform with a terrific screech of metal. In an instant the car was over the first peak and free-falling into the tunnel below. Inside the cool passage, bright lights and spiraling visuals dazzled the eyes as the passengers propelled through the darkness. Then the car came to a jarring halt, launching all 8 riders into their chest guards. The light show immediately blinked out, leaving them in an empty void of recirculated air. "What the?" Kyle cried from somewhere in the dark. Gary started to sob and Jeremy babbled crazily about a crash. Then they heard someone scream outside of the tunnel, and silence quickly followed. Not even Gary was crying in the back. Then Alan Season screamed again, this time in strangled anguish, before muffling into nothing. They heard the crack of a gunshot and Karen cried out with surprise. A cold silence stole over them as they trembled in their seats, too frightened to speak. Ryan searched for Karen's hand in the dark and they found each other somewhere in the middle, sweaty fingers intertwining. She sobbed quietly while Ryan gasped for air. Then the car lurched forward again, excelling from 0 to 80 miles per hour. As soon as they emerged from the tunnel, they were greeted with harsh sunlight. The Black Knight came to another wrenching stop, Ryan's head striking the hard padding of his chest guard. Stars exploded in front of his eyes as he looked around. They were now stuck at a 45-degree angle directed straight down. Ryan followed the track with his eyes and saw they were at the verge of the first upside-down loop. "Ryan!" Karen screamed. "Look!" In stunned silence, Ryan realized she was pointing at the Black Knight statue, and he knew at once what he was looking at. There, hanging from one of the sculpture's outstretched hands, dangled the body of Alan Seasons, swaying back and forth from a cable. The cable was wrapped around his throat, drawing blood. The other end of the cable ended at a gnarled hook, wedged between the statue's curled fingers. Ribbons of blood trickled from his revealed entrails. His head rested on his shoulder, his face pulled back in a pained grimace. Mr. Seasons was barely off the ground, the steel toes of his boots just scratching with the gravel below him. Just above his nose, like a third eye crying tears of blood, someone had shot him. Everyone in the car screamed.